Hey, welcome back to the NOTCAST, number 348. Today, 29th December 2023, which means that Kraftwerk's 8th studio album, The Man Machine, is 45 for another 2 days. And then, of course, we go into 2024, we go into the future, and I can't say that it's 45 years old, I have to say that it's 46 years old. And as many of you probably worked out, I've got one of those white colour bar lighting things so that I don't look like I'm living in a dungeon. This isn't a dungeon, this is more of a penthouse, this is at the top of the house. But I have it set to red at the moment, which makes me look like I'm Maximilian at the end of the film The Black Hole, which, if you haven't seen it, spoiler alert, the film is 43 years old. If you haven't seen it by now, it's on you. Instead, I'm going to go to the more familiar white light, which you might be familiar with, and see how that goes for you. Hopefully not blinding. So NOTCAST 348. The plan is that I will do 2 more this year, since today's the 29th. Do one on the 30th, one on the 31st. The one on the 31st will be number 350. That'll be my end of year roundup. The next one tomorrow is probably going to be my top 10 albums of the year, sorted alphabetically, because as Neil Colcarney says, music is not a sport or a competition. And so I'm going to talk about Kraftwerk's 8th studio album. Now I'm going to talk about the record as was released, The Man Machine, and a whole bunch of other things that happened around about the same time. Single releases, compilations, various re-recordings, remixes, and so on that happened over a period of time. Released in May 1978, this is regarded by many people as the best Kraftwerk album. I am not amongst them. It is very, very good. In fact, if I had to write a list of my top 100 albums of all time, this would definitely be in there, but it's probably my 3rd favourite Kraftwerk album. The other 2 will leave you shocked and appalled for future episodes. But also, it's certainly the best album, in my opinion, that they'd released to date. So the best one. Every album, every band actually, has a period of building up to a record, and then every record after that point is a response to or reaction to what's happening to it. With U2, for example, it's probably Joshua Tree or Achtung Baby. With Iron Maiden, in my opinion, everything up to Seventh Son of a Seventh Son is on the way up. Everything after that is a response to it. Everything that Kraftwerk did was building up to The Man Machine. Everything they released after it was, in the very least, a response to the events that had happened after it. This was the last time, I think, that Kraftwerk were completely pure in their artistic and commercial endeavours, which is interesting, genuinely interesting, because this is a strong, brilliant record, immaculately produced. Even now, it sounds like it's a record made next year, not a record made this year. And even now, it's a record that sounds like it belongs to a future that never existed, a future that we could have had if only mankind had turned a slightly different direction instead of the way that we did turn. It is also quite pivotal in the band's body of work for a number of reasons. It is the 4th record that the band made with Wolfgang Flür, the 3rd the band made with Karl Bartos. It was the first one where someone called Henning Schmitz started working with the group in an engineering capacity. Henning has been playing live and a member of Kraftwerk for over 32 years now, as I speak. It was also, I think, probably the most classic. If you think about Kraftwerk, you think about, well, the guys in the red shirts with the black ties. You think about these elegant songs about space and technology, and this is where all of that starts to coalesce. Because remember, the albums that came before it, Organisations, Tone Float, Kraftwerk 1 and 2, Ralph and Florian, that's 4. Then we had Autobahn, Radioactivity, Trans-Europe Express. It was only with those last 3 records, starting with Autobahn, that the concept of not just a bunch of songs, but that, whatever the word is for it, the Gerstangfilm, I think it's called. I know I've got that wrong. Don't think less of me if you're German. The idea of a record being a complete work of art, from the music to the presentation, to the artwork, to the lyrics, to the sequencing. Everything was created as effectively a sonic work of art that you could hang or display in a museum. And I've seen Kraftwerk play live in the Tate Modern, so in a museum. and also a presentation of their live show at the Electronic Music Exhibition 2 years ago in London. So Kraftwerk are very definitely starting to position themselves as not just a group, but as a collective of serious-minded artists working with deep and heavy concepts that informed the world. Man Machine is the album where I think everything started to come together in a way that was truly innovative and unlike anything else that had happened at the time. So you think about 1978. What did the world look like in 1978? Well, it's fair to say that Star Wars was kind of big as a movie and actually quite influential upon the album, as it will shortly become revealed. We also have the experience of the idea of stepping into the future. We're in the last quarter of the 20th century now. This is the 20th century which has seen mankind transform and change its experience of reality. Now, there's a theory that mankind does not create, it only discovers things that are already there. But with the last 25 years, we had things like, we've gone from being able to fly biplanes in the early part of the century, putting a man on the moon, for God's sake, sending satellites out to the furthest reaches of the galaxy. The galaxy had become effectively mankind's playground. The world had become smaller. You could take a flight from Tokyo to Tucson, Arizona, or Tottenham, if that's what you really wanted to do, and it could do it within 24 hours. The idea of the global village had become into the popular parlance. The UK was circling around entering the EU, if it hadn't already entered the EU. We'd moved into decimalisation. We'd moved into the age of the computer, which was starting to become not just some scientific thing that belonged to the military, but something that people had access to. The computing power that you have in your telephone right now, your mobile phone, is stronger and more powerful than the technology that took mankind to the goddamn moon. The world was shrinking, and Kraftwerk were predicting a future that may have come to pass. Now, the tragedy is the beautiful future that they were predicting didn't quite happen. We got a bastardization of it, where commercial interests, as commercial interests often do, stepped into the arena, took control of the dialogue, monetized everything, and turned it into marketing and data, as opposed to in terms of communication and knowledge. These are themes that Kraftwerk will pick up with later on, especially on the Computer World and Electric Cafe albums. Both albums I rate very, very highly, by the way. But the Man Machine is where all those concepts started to come together. This is an album where the band's lineup had clearly coalesced and solidified to the peak of its powers. So obviously Ralph and Florian had been in the group since the start. Wolfgang had joined 5 years previously. Carl had joined the group about 3 years previously. This was the third album made by that holy quartet. What many people regard as the classic lineup of the band, and certainly the most productive lineup of the band. It was also pivotal in the band's history in two ways. Firstly, after this, nobody ever thought about Kraftwerk as a band. They always thought about them as the Man Machine. It changed the concept of what that group was. They no longer were regarded as musicians, but more as workers or scientists, experimenting with sound. And when they found something that was true, they wrote down the results. And they worked and grafted and created these songs through over 100 sessions, working 5 days a week for over 20 weeks, Monday to Friday. Like Monday to Friday planes, actually, if I quote the film about snakes on a plane, putting together these songs and kind of trimming away all the bits that didn't look or sound like Kraftwerk at all. Like all Kraftwerk songs, they were built out of jamming in the studio. Jamming's a terrible word. I hate it. It's not really the way to write songs, in my opinion. You've got to come in with an idea and then the band build upon it. But in this one, certainly the band played together, 3 or 4 people in a room, laying with their respective areas of responsibility and their respective specialisms. Wolfgang working on, for example, percussive loops, technology, drum machines, home-making synthesizers, Ralph working on melodies, Florian on sounds and textures, and Carl working on things like melodies and motifs and keyboard lines with a strong kind of rhythmic bent, as he was also a percussionist. Working through those kind of ideas and then building up songs that came and came into existence for minutes at a time and then disappeared, recording everything. And then as the true trick came, is editing those songs down into something that makes sense. The Man Machine is a very short, succinct album. It's maybe 32, 33 minutes long, but you don't need huge amounts of time to change the world. The scene in Ghostbusters with the Marshmallow Man, for example, is over in about 2 minutes 56 seconds, the blink of an eye. But yet that changed the cinematic universe and gave us a Marshmallow Man forever. The Man Machine is barely half an hour of music, but it's perhaps the most influential half hour of music we had since the Beatles' debut. It was classic, the album. It was modern, it was minimal. It worked through the concept of joy through repetition and through minimalism. So if you listen to the musical backings, you know, once you set beyond a certain template, the songs themselves don't change dramatically. It's more the tiny variations that sit inside that give each one of those tiny variations immense power. Kind of like when you look through the window of a train and you're passing through all the fields in Britain and you go through one field, I think it's just outside Headcorn, and someone's put like an Easter Island statue in their garden, and suddenly you remember that forever, because if every garden had an Easter Island statue in, nobody would notice. It's the tiny variations that make all the difference on an album like this. And it's around this repetition, this tiny variations that matter. And it's a mindset called, for example, flow static. So if you're looking at static, for example, and you see all these the human mind builds patterns out of those. It builds shapes out of things that you will recognise. And with Man Machine, it then starts to go, well, actually, this musical backing, let's say Space Lab, Metropolis, for example, the Neon Lights, these are long songs, but tiny variations, a drum beat here, a melody line there, suddenly give it all a huge degree of importance and difference. As an album, it's magnificent. It's one of the best albums I've ever heard. And as I said, it's not dated. I don't listen to it and get the sense that it's anything other than a record that could have always existed. And as soon as you heard it, as soon as I heard it, it had this huge sense of familiarity, this sense that the future has been here forever, that I've always known these songs. And those songs have always existed, I just haven't heard them before. In the way that a great song is both predictable and surprising. You listen to it and you kind of go, of course, why did nobody write a song like this before? And at the same, point, you listen to it and go, it feels like I've always known you, this song. It feels like I've always known this song. And it changed and shaped parts of the reality that exist to this day. The concept of melding man and machine reflected where we as a civilization were in 1978. The idea of industry and the individual, where they intersected and overlapped. The idea of work and identity. The songs about the invisible architecture of reality that surrounded us, that was hugely influential on people like Gary Newman, David Bowie, and New Wave, where Kraftwerk themselves had become a work of art, and their job was to reflect back to society at least part of the character of the modern age. It's a phenomenal album, and I've spent a third of the running time of the album just talking about how good it is, but there's so much more to kind of talk about that goes with it. It was recorded between 1977 and 1978, starting on the 5th of May 1977, ending with the last bit of mixing, Ruder's studio in Dusseldorf on the 17th of February 1978. And the reason the band moved out of their Kling Klang studio in Dusseldorf, where the recording took place, to Ruder's was because Ruder's had a new 24-track desk, which is where the album was mixed and finalised and mastered before it was kind of sent off on the 17th of February. Whilst the band played no live shows during this period, they made 2-3 television appearances, and they effectively, for some reason, even though they were selling significant amounts in France, it sold 200,000 copies in France, got to number 2 in the French charts, sold 100,000 in the UK, got to number 9. I think it got to maybe, in fact, I don't even know where it got in the German charts. It sold a considerable amount, but maybe not quite enough to make live shows viable at that point. And those were in the days when playing live was an advert for the album, and the album was not the advert for the live shows, by the way. So the world has turned on its head over time since the release of this. But it's an album that every song feels like it's building upon and contributing to the song preceding it and complementing the song that it follows, or the song that comes after it. So we start off, first track on the album is The Robots. Now I need to go and pick up some records, because some things have fallen over and it will all become relevant over time. So, back soon. So the first song on the album, and I'm cheating slightly because I'll show you the German version of this. The first song on the album was The Robots, which was released as a single. Here is a 7-inch from Electrola in Germany, backed with Space Lab. Look at that gorgeous, sexy label. This features a 7-inch edit of The Robots. And The Robots is one of the most pivotal Kraftwerk tracks in the band's history. It's a song that the band have played live at pretty much every show that they've played since its release. And it's a song that really kind of defines and mythologizes the band in a way which the band hasn't necessarily done previously. It's a sequel to the single Showroom Dummies. And I need to actually point out that Showroom Dummies was released as a single in 1978 after its first and initial failure to be successful on 7-inch and 12-inch. It got released as a 12-inch in 1978, this time Showroom Dummies, backed with Space Lab and Europe Endless. So, and taking on the a version of the cover art that happened for the album. They really tried to make Showroom Dummies a hit, and it hasn't been a hit. It got released in 1977, 1978, and in a remixed form in 1982, hot on the heels of the band's #1 single, The Model. Yeah, that was weird when The Model was #1 4 years after the song was released, but there you go. Showroom Dummies was a song that the band really tried to make a hit. Although, of course, and I must have a word with EMI Records about this, or Capitol, because this is an American 12-inch, I think, at the time, is that, oh, look at that. Oh, how lovely is that? Sorry, I probably shouldn't be doing this, but my word, what a lovely label that is. You can't knock the band's artistic vision at this point. Everything just looked magnificent. It looked like it had been designed by craftsmen and artists for human consumption. You know, in some respects, as the cover to the XTC record says, you know, a record cover is merely an advert for the music that takes place inside. But with this period, there'd been almost like a perfect union of visuals and sounds to give you the impression of both a classic and futuristic approach. The cover art is all for this, and also the Man Machine is very clearly influenced by El Lisisti, who I've never pronounced that name before, Lisitsky, and also a form of art called suprematism, which was using red and black and Cyrillic and strong kind of Russian language and typography and fonts. The fundamentals of geometry and symmetry and straight lines and angles in basic colours to create an impression of what's called a reduced image. So it's very minimal in terms of the record covers. Now, I've been on the Steve Hoffman forums, and I suspect some of you have been on the Steve Hoffman forums as well, and there's a thread on there where people are talking about, oh, album art that is amazing, and it's all paintings, of, you know, naked women on top of huge squirrels fighting dragons and stuff. And it's like, actually, all I realise is my taste in art is very different. Paintings of incidents are generally extremely conventional, and they're quite dull. You know, the thing is, a record sleeve should give you an idea of, a flavour of, what's the record inside like, what's the music sound like, what are the themes and concepts that exist within inside the record. And the cover art for the Man Machine is perfect at expressing exactly the concepts that you've got there. So you've got this kind of red and black, which is colours which were associated with 1930s kind of Russian art. These fonts which are very austere, very capital, very not human but cold, with hard lines and sharp edges. The use of angles here, so everything's at a right angle, so that comes at a right angle to that, which comes at a right angle to the stairs. And the only thing that's not at a right angle is the humans, who are standing kind of in a ranked fashion, looking identical, emotionless, hyper-realised. So even if you put the, you know, the sleeve like that, then you'd be looking at a 45-degree angle, and it's kind of saying, well, actually the humans are important that are in this. But again, a traditional record cover design would have your band name in kind of like a straight line at the top. It maybe would have that there, and then you'd have a slightly different. But all of this is around creating the idea of a very, not unnatural, but very regimented, ordered, structured reality. And that is a huge chunk of what the man machine is. The idea that even a man is a machine, it's an organism, and it's a machine for breathing and eating and making music and procreating and filming videos for YouTube, of course. And as you can see from here, the visual art is the idea is that you repeat machine 7 times, and you have a different letter that runs all the way through, and it creates this kind of architecture, this visual language of not austerity, but of coldness. And how cold is coldness? Well, the answer is very, of course. But the fundamentals of geometry and symmetry in this are also repeated on the back here. This idea is that the machine there reflects in also the colours that we've got on the t-shirt. The idea of angles in imagery and kind of geometric blocks. It's very Worker meets Parasite, by the way, if you think about the Simpsons cartoon that mocked post-industrial, post-communist, or more correctly, communist states, where the human as an individual has an identity only in relation to the ecosystem and the organism that surrounded it, the state, the nationality, the national glory, that is, so to speak, that builds into and feeds into very, very deeply the sense that a human as an individual is merely a cog in a machine, a man inside the machine. This is the one of the 1980s Fame Records reissues, which was a budget label. I bought a lot of records on Fame when I was growing up because they were cheaper. They were £3.49 for an LP, as opposed to about £7 or £8, and I really needed that £3.49. And if you're into getting old classic vinyl, by the way, don't miss opportunities to get records on the Fame label. They are, in every respect, worthy. They just have slightly thinner inner sleeves, slightly thinner vinyl, same cuts, same pressings, whole thing. So do go with it. Now there's an inner sleeve to this version of the Man Machine. Don't worry, I'll get to talking about the robots. I haven't forgotten. And lo and behold, it's in black and red. Now, I don't have many other Fame inner sleeves at the moment. Maybe that's deliberate, maybe that isn't. I'm not quite sure. But I'm hoping that it is deliberate. And this version is it says here, Capitol Records. So this is an American edition of it. It's got, instead of having handwritten kind of stampers, it's got, and it's probably in the wrong inner sleeve, actually. I've never really given that much thought. Oh, it's on Capitol EMI, copyright, Kling Klang Music, on Fame, distributed in France by Pathé Marconi. So this looks like it's a French edition, actually, on Capitol Records. So that's exciting. I hadn't realised that before. I just bought a copy because it was cheap and affordable, and that's, you know, how I made my record collection when I was growing up. So track 1, I've been talking about it for a while. Let's talk about track 1. Track 1 is The Robots. Here is the German 7-inch. And as I've said before, and if you looked at the 12-inch that there was there of Showroom Dummies and another 12-inch of Neon Lights, if you thought about singles in terms of buying and owning non-album tracks, buying singles for the B-sides, which is a lot of what I did. I bought singles for the B-sides. I saw these as music delivery systems. These weren't things where I'd buy the 12-inch just to have the tracks that I already had on 33 RPM on a 45 RPM edition. That's not how I approach these at all. I bought these because I wanted to hear the music. These are music delivery systems, and irrespective of formatting or any of that. But on here, for example, on Showroom Dummies, the B-side is Space Lab and Europe Endless. Now, if you were going to be canny about it and you wanted to sell to people, here's something you haven't heard before that hasn't been on an album, well, you'd put you'd put the German version of Europa Endless on there, wouldn't you? You'd put maybe the French version, Les Mannequins of Showroom Dummies, and you kind of go, oh, those are 2 new tracks that aren't on the album. I'll go and listen to those, you know. Or you could call it, you know, Les Mannequins French remix and Europa Endless German remix, and you go, oh, that's exciting. But they weren't interested in that at the time. They just put your standard LP tracks on the B-side, which could be one of the reasons why people didn't necessarily buy the singles, unless, of course, the Robots, which came in a highly edited form on a 7-inch, because the original is about 7 minutes long. This 7-inch, as previously mentioned, the German 7-inch backed with Space Lab there, is magnificent. It's one of Kraftwerk's signature tracks, and it's changed how the band has been perceived ever since that date when it was released. It takes as and ties in with the themes I mentioned earlier about Russian. So there's a lyric around I am Sluga, the voice of Robotnik, which is the part of the break that goes in the middle of the track, which effectively acts as the punctuation between the verse and the choruses. Translated, that means I am your servant, I am your worker. And the idea being that humans were actually being regarded as robots, workers, units of economic production, existing inside the capitalist system. You know, the idea that if it wasn't for trade unions, for example, we wouldn't have things like annual leave, sick leave. We wouldn't have, you know, pay rises. But what we would have, to our capitalist overlords, is revolutions and your head's on a pole. So perhaps you should maybe respect the unions because they're better that way, to give the people a little than it is to not give them anything, and then find out that the peasants are literally revolting. So the Robots is not only all of those things, it's a fabulously danceable track. As I said before, a sequel to Showroom Dummies, and it's about Kraftwerk as scientists, workers, outside work, operating almost outside of work, dispassionately working outside of art as a form of work in itself, and creating. You know, the work is really, this is our work. We're farmers, we're farming sound, and this is what we're creating. Here is our harvest. It is our album. So I am your servant, I am your worker. It's also, by the way, the Robots, heavily influenced by 2 significant science fiction films, both of which you have probably seen. The first one of which I've already shown you, is 1977's hugely influential and influential Star Wars. You might have heard of it. Saw it at the cinema recently. This is 2006 DVD featuring, for the only time on disc since the Laserdiscs in 1993, the original theatrical versions on an unremastered Laserdisc port of the original theatrical version. So this is non-anamorphic. It's not great quality, but if you want to get the theatrical cuts of Star Wars, you do need to get these pretty obscure 2006 releases. That said, the Robots is influenced by 2 really, really important films. This is the first one. The second one is Metropolis by Fritz Lang, a film that I have 3 different editions of. I have, God, heaven help me, 1984's Giorgio Moroder 90-minute recut with a truly terrible soundtrack. I have the 2011 expanded edition, which is the original theatrical cut, which runs to 118 minutes. This is on Eureka. And then I have the super duper version featuring scenes taken from the Brazilian interpositive, which runs at about 100 and let me quickly check, 150 minutes version of Metropolis, which is here on Blu-ray, which is on Eureka as well. This is the definitive version of Metropolis, by the way. So if you want to get a definitive version of Metropolis by Fritz Lang, this is the puppy to get. But as you can see from the cover art to these 2, there is a significant golden robot that's featured in this. It's also a film which touches upon a number of theories and themes which appear in the rest of the record, around the nature of a man living inside a city, around the nature of work, slavery, revolution, and the robot. And of course, by the way, Star Wars, to quote the great Capaldi in the thick of it, features a gay golden robot and an angry dustbin. And of course, although C-3PO, they're clearly highly influenced by Metropolis, but it's a film that influenced Star Wars, and Star Wars influenced Kraftwerk in a way that perhaps you wouldn't necessarily realise, because we were ushering in an age of the future. So the start of the recording of this album, 5th of May 1977, you may remember, May the 4th be with you, the date that Star Wars was meant to be released. And I think it was May 25th it came out in the UK, 3 weeks later. It is influenced also by the bleeps and the bloops. So you think about Kraftwerk, you think about the robots, you think about the all that stuff. That's taken completely lock, stock and barrel from the noises that have been made by R2-D2 beeping and whooping like a sarcastic little bitch in Star Wars: A New Hope. It all ties in. It's all part of the same thing. It's a Kraftwerk feeling the temperature of the room and coming forward with some ideas that then shape the rest of everything. It's all there if you want to look at it. It's all straightforward and it all kind of ties in with everything else that's going on. 1978, of course, when the album came out, we started to see a lot of second-hand Johnny-come-lately influenced copies of Star Wars. Things like Battle Beyond the Stars, Buck Rogers, Battlestar Galactica, loads of other crap. Most of it not very good at all. But it all kind of influenced the future, technology, the robots. They were all part of this kind of 25 years to the end of the millennia paranoia that we had about the future that was always going to be so bright you had to wear shades. Track 2 on the album then, and let's get back to the record, is Space Lab. Space Lab, of course, also the B-side of the robots here. And Space Lab is a song that, again, the band play live frequently. I've seen them play it live at least 4 or 5 times over the years. Magnificent track, hugely influential. In fact, when I saw Kraftwerk at the Tate Modern in 2013, I went to the night that they played techno pop. Electric Cafe, bitches. It's going to be Electric Cafe until I die. It doesn't matter if you retitle it. They played Space Lab and they had 32 speakers in the ceiling. They were running in a convex kind of semicircle around. Like you think about 5.1, but things like 32.1 instead. And there's a bass run that runs in the middle of Space Lab, a descending bass riff, I think. And the guy next to me was just like, fuck me. He was very impressed. I was very impressed too, but I was British and didn't show any emotion, because British people don't show emotion. It's not what we do. But Space Lab is just one of the most magnificent songs ever. It kind of opens on this kind of ascending, slowly ticking, almost like an exploding kind of riff. It's also, by the way, the most obviously and only track that's directly linked to space travel and space exploration in the whole of Kraftwerk's body of work. Technology had transformed the world. Mankind was leaving the world. The world was just an option in a sea of choices. It wasn't even kind of like, the only planet that we could been to. Man had already trod on the moon. We were sending things to Mars and beyond the limits of the galaxy. The ISS, the International Space Station, was just about to come into existence. Space Lab was being constructed, a joint agreement between America and Russia that would enable scientific exploration on an international basis in a land where borders and countries were seen as meaningless as they actually realistically are, which is just little men putting flags onto arbitrary bits of rock. Space Lab is one of the best Kraftwerk tracks that there is. It kind of taps into very, very clearly and identifies the optimism that could come with cross-border cooperation, the idea that nations could somehow be flattened into merely units of identification, no more different or important than a postcode, and how little mankind has moved on since that idealistic and heady days of 1978. The way that this song was written, like a lot of songs, was transformed by the band creating, adapting and bastardizing their existing technology for their own purposes. One of the things that really changed the shape of Kraftwerk's work was the use of a sequencer. And the sequencer effectively allowed them to modulate and repeat endlessly various loops of 16ths, 18ths, 30 seconds, whatever it is. So the phasing kind of secondary bass line that you don't even notice is there, but it's just a texture that repeats endlessly like waves. Nobody notices like individual waves. Everyone just sees, oh, it's just waves. It's just waves of sound that exist underneath you, and then it's kind of pitched and bent as it looped and repeated endlessly towards the conclusion of the song. Is that it then created, and as I was talking earlier, and how this minimal variation through the album. The Man Machine is a fabulous use of sequences. You didn't need to press any more. Go dun 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 dun. You could just get a machine to repeat that 32, 56, 128 times, 1,000 times, however many times you needed it to repeat that. And then you could actually just manipulate the input, and then you could go, right, so I'm going to move it down a key, up a key, pitch it, bend it, phase it, move it, work it, whatever. Do whatever you wanted to it, and then that was the variation was the thing that made the song work, because it wasn't just the joy through repetition, it was the joy through variation in minimal degrees of repetition. And then with that sequencer bass, that loop that was put in the middle of the song, they were then able to improvise over, adapt and build on top of it. So the thing that you're really listening for when you listen to, say, Space Lab, Metropolis, what you're actually hearing is the melody lines that carry the song. No one's really listening to the sequencer, but if you took that bass sequencer out of Metropolis or Space Lab or whatever it is, people would be like, wow, it sounds really weird, it sounds really, really wrong. Like if you've got like wired headphones and there's missing a bit that's in there, and you kind of go, oh, this doesn't sound quite right, I can't quite hear it. With that, Wolfgang's role in the group, I think, probably started to diminish a little bit, because he was brought in to be the band's obviously drummer and percussionist. So he was limited to marginalised drumming, which then actually you just took sequences and loops and parts of it and you repeated it, that he then played live. Which, if the band weren't playing live, meant that effectively he was almost redundant. He moved into the role of creating, adapting, building technology in a less obvious fashion. And so he became more techie, building and adapting devices. The song Space Lab was clearly inspired by the International Space Station and also by the shuttle test of the 12th of August 1977. Think about the space shuttles, Discovery, Challenger, Endeavour, those type of things. Also, if you're in Russia, Buran, which I think flew twice, these were where it looked like the idea is you could just commute to space. It was just easy. You just get into the thing and it goes up and it drops you back, and there you go. And it was about the possibilities of space, the final frontier, as obviously kind of also mentioned in Star Trek, but also in Star Wars, where it was just like, well, I'm just going to go to Alderaan. And instead of all going, you're going to another bloody planet. It's like, nah, I'm just going to go to Alderaan. It's like, well, I'm going to go to, Wolverhampton. Mate, you're right, Bab, but do you want anything picking up from Alderaan? Maybe not. Who knows? And then that was followed with the third track on the album, which is Metropolis. Now, I've said before, Metropolis was, of course, heavily influenced by the rather fabulous, hugely influential film by Fritz Lang. So instead of showing you the Man Machine, I'm going to show you the DVDs of Metropolis again, because I've got to try and shake it up a little bit. But Metropolis, as a song, is obviously massively influenced by Fritz Lang, massively influenced by the idea of the man and the machine living together in perfect harmony. The metropolis being effectively the human ecosystem that has been built by human imagination, running all the way through it like a stick of rock, from the lines that were cut into the rock underneath the city for the metro line itself, all the way through to things like telephone wires and water mains and electricity cables. All of that coming together in this huge, gorgeous symphony of technology, the metropolis, mankind's version of the beehive or the ant's nest, where we all live together, not always necessarily happy or in harmony, but with our own paths, our ideas, our skill sets, that we all worked together using barter, trade and capitalism to sell our skills, which we then converted into other units of production that became the basis of capitalism itself. Sorry if I sound like Vlad the Explainer here, or perhaps a member of Socialist Worker, but Metropolis is one of the songs about living in a city that very, very few people really, it just kind of passes over them, the idea of this kind of thing about, it's a song about cities and living in cities and how mankind must live together to live in a metropolis. the city itself as an organism and as a machine which man happens to exist within, and the robot influence that we have. So for example, that line about I am your servant, I am your worker in the robots, the idea that the worker exists inside a city and the worker is a servant that serves the city by creating and adding in their own tiny, infinitesimally small way towards the operation of the city. And that was Metropolis. The whole thing kind of fit together like a gorgeous little jigsaw, the Man Machine. And then side one of the album finishes and you turn it over and you get side two. And on side two, you get the song that most people think of when they think of Kraftwerk. They think of The Model. And this is again the German 7-inch. I'd like to thank the German record company for having the brains to stick the English version of The Model on the B side. So if you existed in Germany, you were able to buy English language versions of the tracks, which aren't remixes, they're different recordings with different vocals. This is the German 7-inch of The Model, Das Model, which I think came out in, and let me just quickly check, it doesn't say, but I'm guessing 1978. And The Model here, as it says on the background, also available as a maxi single, was, in my opinion, one of their finest songs. It's I mean, despite me saying it's going to be underrated, it's overlooked by a lot of Kraftwerk fans because it became #1 in the UK charts in 1982 when it was put on the B-side of Computer Love, and the DJs preferred playing the B-side instead of the A-side to The Model. The first thing it comes from is it reflects two things. Firstly, in architecture, design, scoping, you have a model, you have a smaller version of something, effectively a proof of concept. It's also, of course, a song that most obviously talks about the female ideal, the model, the supermodel, something or somebody that's so beautiful that they can almost barely be conceived as existing in the same plane as reality, but as some kind of version for other people to merely gawp at in amazement that that thing exists. It's a bizarre song in so much as it's the most obviously Kraftwerk song about the male gaze. She's a model and she's looking good. I'd like to take her home. That's understood. I saw her on the cover of a magazine. And it's based, first off, the lyric for the song, by the way, was written by Emil Schult. He was still writing lyrics for the group. And it was the lyric to a different song completely. And it was then the lyric was taken away from the song by Karl Bartos and by Ralph Hutter, and the lyrics were adapted by Ralph Hutter alongside Emil Schult's original, and then turned into a completely new song. So it's kind of like taking the lyrics for a different song and adding them to a completely new song and making it a song in its own right. It was #1 in 1982. It's short, it's only 3.5 minutes long. It's been played live by Kraftwerk at every show that they've played since it was released, at least that I know of. And it's a lovely song. It's really good. Everything about it is very minimal. Every step is absolutely precise. It neither under nor overplays its mark. What I will say is the German language version of the song has a slightly different vocal, where Ralph sings about correct, which takes its pronunciation from a barman in Dusseldorf who was at a bar that the band frequented. The barman in Dusseldorf was incentivized to sell alcohol that had the largest profit margin, and the thing that had the largest profit margin was bottles or glasses of champagne and wine. So when somebody came in, he wouldn't go, do you want our Wurst is the best or anything like that, or do you want Jägermeister or Löwenbräu or Hoffenbeer or whatever it's called, these are these standard German beers. He would always try and sell you the wine and the champagne because he would get more money that way. And then he goes, you want Sekt, which I think is German for wine. He goes, correct. And that's where the lyric comes from. From there, it's about a barman that was incentivized by how profitable the alcohol he sold was, and was an in-joke amongst the band. When Kraftwerk play the model live, it is opened with that 1, 2, 3, 4, which is also from the beginning of Showroom Dummies, I believe, the 7-inch. But it's obviously also a cheeky nod and a wink and a homage to the Ramones, one of the finest bands of all time. Finally, there is a sound check version of the model, which was recorded, I think, in Birmingham or Glasgow in 1991, where Ralph sings, and instead of saying, "I'd like to see her again," he changes the look to, "I'd like her to fuck her again. You're a very naughty boy, Ralph." Good thing that version wasn't released, but it's still been heard. That is the model, the millstone around Kraftwerk's neck, but also the thing that liberated them by giving them a #1 single and therefore giving them an automatic career. Some bands need 2 or 3 hits, and then once you've got that, you've got a career for the rest of your life. Kraftwerk, for example, it was Autobahn, the model, and then later on things like Computer Love or Trans-Europe Express. 4 or 5 songs like that, and you'll have a built-in audience of a certain size for the rest of your life. Maybe not one to sustain you, but one that certainly would allow you to have at least enough pocket money from being a Saturday band to make it work. Track 5 on the album, the penultimate track on the album, released as yet another single, Neon Lights. This came on a 7-inch, which is here in a fabulous cover. By the way, I think that is the building that the woman falls off and commits suicide on in the beginning of Lethal Weapon. So that is the Capitol Records building somewhere in America. And that's Neon Lights, and he comes on a 12-inch version here. I'm going to talk about the 7-inch first of Neon Lights. It features an edit of Neon Lights alongside an edit of Trans-Europe Express, and as a third B-side, the model on the 7-inch, really packing it in there, value for money. Instead, what you also get on the 12-inch is the LP mix of Neon Lights, and you get Trans-Europe Express, and you get the model again. But this is an unusual little release. It says on here, luminous vinyl. Let's go and open that up, because this is bloody gorgeous. Look at that. Oh my giddy aunt. I'm having feelings. That is the Neon Lights luminous 12-inch. And if you were to, let's say, put it under a light there, like this, and then do it like that, and then it glows in the dark if you switch all the lights off. So actually, I'm going to go and switch the lights off now. Stay with me, and I'll do that in a moment, and we'll see how that goes. But firstly, I'm going to put the Neon Lights 12-inch there in front of the lights. Neon Lights is, in my opinion, an absolutely fabulous track. It's beautiful, and I remember the first time I saw Kraftwerk play it live, which was at the Royal Festival Hall in London on the 18th of March 2004. And it's got this brilliant conceit about the shimmering city lights of shops, neon lights, shimmering neon lights, taking obviously some influence from the neon lights that the band had underneath each member of the group when the band performed live, identifying the individual members that existed of the group, but also the idea of, and as seen in the video, things like, you know, shops of pharmacies and drugstores and supermarkets, kind of talking about cities as cathedrals of capitalism and of expenditure, shopping becoming entertainment, city centres as merely malls that existed for which you could worship by giving your money to the various organisations that were sold there. Neon Lights charted at number 53 in the UK. It was not a big seller. Instead, it was a song that became a live classic over a period of time. And it's interesting from a production point of view, because I'll have to get technical here, and I don't fully understand it because I haven't got any of this technology, is that Florian synced a Polymoog into a Minimoog and then synced that to a Synthorama, so he had control over the sequences. So instead of all the individual parts being played individually every time, again, it was a sequence loop, as I've mentioned in the robots, that then adapted and varied over time to reflect what it really is. And then it became, then that became a huge influence on the Computer World album, the next Kraftwerk album that came out. But it's also a song that really heavily influenced and talked about things like film, banks, politics, police, commerce, pharmacies, medicine, all themes which later turned up in the Computer World album. And at this point, I'm going to go off script. I'm going to put this down for a second. I'm going to go and switch the light off over there, and we're going to see exactly how glow in the dark this record is. Hang on a second, pop kids. And right Here we Oh, hang on. Right, see that, right? Excellent. Let's put this back on. You can tell, oh my, what dramatic lighting this is. Also much the better to light up the neon lights 12-inch with, darling. I'm going to get the power control here. This is exciting. I know, you can hardly wait, right? So there you go. And then let's put this there. Let's switch this off. See? Look at that glow. All right, you can't really see it glow, but I can see it glow. It glows a very dull, kind of pale green. So it is technically luminous. I probably should have put it under for about an hour or so. Actually, I need to switch this light off over here. Hang on a second, good sir. There you are. Does that count? Who knows? Maybe not. But if you put it under there, and then you put it there like that, again, it does glow. Oh, isn't that exciting? Well, who knows? Maybe that should be the picture that I put on the front of the episode. Maybe not. Who knows? Let's do that a little more. Ooh, just a little bit more, because my pop culture references are all bloody ancient. And then switch it off. Can you see that? There, glowing. That is your luminous vinyl. Well, isn't that exciting? Very, very thrilling when it came out way back when, which was, oh my word, 45 years ago. Proper futuristic nonsense. Hang on, I'll be back. Oh, I bet you didn't realise I could stand up. Wasn't sure I could, actually, given the amount of time I spend sitting down. And then the last track on the album, The Man Machine itself, track 6, not played live by Kraftwerk until, somewhat staggeringly, 1993, where I think it was first played in Innsbruck. And they only played 3 shows in 1993. The first time I saw Kraftwerk play The Man Machine live was at the Tribal Gathering show in Luton on the 24th of May 1997. And The Man Machine kind of encapsulates and takes up all of the themes which existed throughout the rest of the record and presents them all in one place. The Man Machine, semi-human being, etc. About just how all these things kind of fit together. It's a fabulous song, classically constructed, sounds absolutely gorgeous. That's Kraftwerk's Man Machine. There was a CD issue. Here was the original CD issue. So this is well, it says 1978 Hollywood Capitol. I think this is the American CD from the mid-80s, which is again a flat transfer. Actually, let's quickly check. Yep, 1978. So this is a flat transfer from a cassette master, I believe, like a lot of early 90s CDs were. This is the German CD of The Man Machine. I had to import this from Amazon.de in 1997 using a very primitive version of Google Translate. And again, reflecting the slight different variation that we've got in sleeves that we've got and cover designs and things there. But again, featuring different recordings, different performances of Die Roboter, Das Modell, Neon Licht, and Dimension Machine. And then in 1994 as well, everyone's favourite goth superstar label, Cleopatra, who probably are no doubt putting together a tribute to The Mission, featuring The Mission right now, doing cover versions of Mission songs. Actually, they've already done that. This was perhaps the only thing that's the closest to a Kraftwerk compilation that's existed in the CD era that's been officially released. This features 7-inch versions of Radioactivity, Neon Lights, Showroom Dummies, Antenna, Trans-Europe Express, and the Robots, as well as the French version of Les Mannequins getting a CD release. So this is a really interesting release, kind of blink as you miss it. It's been deleted for many, many years now. They won't be making any more of them. If you want a kind of best of Kraftwerk retrospective with 7-inch edits on, this is the release to get. And also the last one to feature photographs of the band on the front. In 2020, the band did a coloured vinyl reissue program of their English and German releases that tied in with the remasters. This is The Man Machine. This features an alternate cover. As you can see, the photographs of the band have been removed from the front and relegated instead to the inner sleeve, Dimension Machine, in a stylized fashion there, alongside the photograph which goes on the back of the German CD issue there as well. And it features a special, it's called Special Edition Farbages vinyl, as alongside a booklet. Now, this is red vinyl. I did look at getting an original German red vinyl of it, but it was about £80. So I looked instead at my bank account and decided not to get it. This is the red vinyl edition from 2020. So if you're going to buy Kraftwerk vinyl, try and get the coloured vinyl versions of both the German and English releases. These are very, very highly manufactured and specified. They are not made for cheap needles and for cheap players. This stuff is designed to be played on well-weighted, high-end stereo equipment, by the way. Spacelab skips all over it. And there's an expanded booklet in this remaster. This is from the 2009 edition, which features photographs of the band's Dummies taken from the Robots video, more photographs of the Dummies, more photographs of the Dummies, this time in the Kling Klang studio, and Ralph, Florian, Wolfgang and Carl, is featuring special soundproofing baffles there, taken from the Kling Klang studio in Dusseldorf at the time, alongside a photograph of the band at their mixing desk. And there's Ralph and Florian there looking at the ancient master tapes for the records. So that is the 2020 edition of it. As I've said before, the catalogue was remastered in 2004 but not issued. Here's the promotional CDs for that. Hang on a moment. And this is where, at this point in history, the Man Machine still had a version of the cover with the photographs of the band on that was adapted. And last but not least, as I've mentioned before, in 2017, the band released their comprehensive renovations and re-recording box set, 3D, the Catalogue, featuring every one of their studio albums from Autobahn through to Tour de France soundtracks, remixed, re-recorded, rearranged, rethought, reimagined, rebooted, re-everything, with modern equipment for the band's 1990, for the band's 2017 set of shows. So this is the Man Machine. Each one of the albums came in a cover that reflected the respective colour scheme of the album. That's Computer World, for example, and it featured revamped versions with the band's modern technology. No one's ever quite done anything quite like 3D, the Catalogue, and I think it's a really brilliant and interesting idea. It's also a way of making a particularly slender back catalogue lucrative for another few years, and allowed the band to tour on the back of this comprehensive career-spanning box set. The 3D catalogue is a marvellous piece of work. I love it highly, and it ties in with the themes that come through the rest of the band's body of work. That is Kraftwerk's Man Machine, in my opinion, one of the best albums ever made, and still not the best Kraftwerk album ever made. Instead, we have another couple of absolute classics coming up from the band's body of work. There is nothing I can do to recommend this album strongly enough. If you like Kraftwerk, great. If you don't like Kraftwerk, there is never a better time to start than right now. And the next best time, like the best time to delete a tweet, is 5 minutes ago. So Kraftwerk, The Man Machine, is one of my favourite albums of all time. I absolutely love it to bits. And of course, if you do get an opportunity and you can afford to get it, much like the 18, to get the lovely luminous vinyl of Neon Lights, it's one of the best, sexiest records that I have. And I would hesitate to use the word sexy in relation to vinyl because I'm not a nerd, but actually, no, I am a nerd. But I'm not one of those vinyl wankers that thinks that vinyl's better than everything. It's just a really, really nice, lovely, sexy bit of packaging, if that's what you're into. So, The Man Machine by Kraftwerk, one of their best albums, and still one of the best albums ever made, but still not their best album, because they've got loads of other good stuff that they've made as well. So, tomorrow, probably my rundown of the top 10 albums of 2023, presented alphabetically. So, in the meantime, take care of yourselves and each other. Stay beautiful. Thank you. Good night. And see you all again later. All right. Bye. Oh, I do need to switch this off. I've kind of forgotten how to do that. I need to get better at endings, don't I? So